Did anybody get, okay, yeah, it says it's recording. Okay, good. Not the best with tech, but I have Sarah, my backup, should I need any. Awesome, thank you everyone for introducing yourself over the chat. As we go, you can keep sending me your info, which would be great. I'm also happy, I've already shared my email with one person on this call so far. If anyone wants to get in touch afterwards, happy to do that. But yeah, just to introduce myself, my name is Abby Davidson. I am the research manager at the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. We've had a lot of great interactions with conveners.org in the past. We're very similar in many ways. We're a network of organizations that support entrepreneurs in developing economies. So we're based out of Washington, D.C., but have regional chapters. We have 8 throughout the world in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So we work with like investors, foundations, corporations, and then most all entrepreneur support organizations, many of whom are accelerators and incubators. We started a project back in 2015 called the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative with Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And we designed this in partnership with a consortium of public and private funders that were asking the question of, is acceleration actually effective? That's whenever it was getting a lot of buzz in the international development world, and there was a lot of different new, funding opportunities for these programs. But organizations like USAID and the Kauffman Foundation were asking, is this actually effective? We need some more rigorous evidence on whether these programs just sound cool or they're actually making a difference. So that's where this project came about. And now that we are, we've been doing this for 6 years, collecting data, which I'll get into in a minute. We've been able to actually, have some real insights to share with various stakeholders involved with acceleration. So yeah, and please at any time, Sarah, if you stay on and or want to be of any support, the thing you could do is just interrupt me if you see an interesting question in the chat, because please feel free to ask questions as we go and I'll try to address them, but very informal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through like a presentation of some of our most salient findings. And then at the end, I wanted to have a discussion. And let's see, we have 8 participants. So right now, I think we'll just keep it one big group. And then if more people join later, we could do breakout groups if we need to. But please feel free to chat me. Since we're such a small group, you can just unmute, interrupt, ask a question, no big deal. So can you all see my screen? The one that says synthesizing the evidence on accelerator effectiveness? Yes, perfect. Okay, good. So we'll jump right in. So I mentioned GALI, Global Accelerator Learning Initiative. There's so many acronyms between that and Andy. Like I said, we've been collecting data from entrepreneurs to try to address this question of, does acceleration work? And so what that's turned into is, with now more than Emory University began collecting data in 2013. So now we have 8 years of data on entrepreneurs that applied to accelerator programs around the world. We partnered with, I think, over 120 unique organizations, translating into like more than 350 programs, accelerator programs, to capture all the data from entrepreneurs that were applying to and then graduating from their programs. So we now have a publicly available data set of more than 23,000 entrepreneurs, downloadable for any researchers out there or any of you that want to do your own benchmarking, et cetera. Definitely want to make sure that's you're aware that it's out there, totally free. And like I mentioned, we have follow-up data on venture performance over time. Just a couple plugs in case it's useful to any of you, even though it won't be the focus of today. We also have a directory of accelerators, if that's of interest, which we continually search for new ones and validate our existing list. And then we also have a lot of other research other than what I'm going to touch on today, and do a lot of other projects to support accelerators. So do feel free to get in touch. But today I'm going to talk about research we've conducted with this data set of 23,000 plus entrepreneurs. Just to give you a background of this data set, most of the ventures are social ventures, at least in the sense of they say they have a social or environmental mission. So we don't do much more qualifying other than that. Most are very young, less than 3 years old. Common sectors being education, health, ag, ICT. And then, pretty fairly even spread throughout the world, less in the Middle East and less in like East Asia and Pacific. But other than that, like Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, India, US have pretty solid sample size from these places. So when I proposed this session for this event, I proposed that I pull some of the takeaways from 2 reports that we just released in, well, I say just, but in May. And these reports I think are especially useful because we've been really just sort of presenting the data as we see it over the years, saying, this is how we're measuring accelerator impact, this is what we're seeing. But after all these years, I think we've finally been able to have some more confidence in being able to say, this is what the data means for you, an accelerator program, for you, an entrepreneur, for you, an investor. So this is where we've actually provided more suggestions, recommendations. We're a little shy to do that at first to make sure that we're really, what we're finding is really going to stick. But we feel confident enough now that we want to really share everything that we can from this platform. So one note on measuring accelerator impact, I'm sure you've all questioned how to do this with your own programs. It is a very complicated topic that can be approached in many ways. So commonly, if you run an accelerator program, to measure your impact, you're going to look at how the graduates of your program perform over time. Like, are the businesses you support, are they increasing in revenue? Are they gaining investment, et cetera? Fine, that's one way to look at it. But I think
like Khalil Shakaki from Palestine, and one of the people, Feasible, I wasn't actually as impressed as I thought I deserved to be when we had the discussion that included Yossi Klein Halevi.
Oh, I think this is someone.
I thought they missed the mark.
Yeah, Monica Roman.
I muted. Okay. I was like, is someone not impressed with my presentation so far? Okay. So yeah, just to go back a little bit, there's, the starting point of measuring impact would be, how are my accelerator graduates performing? A next step, which Gally decided to take, was to say, we need to compare that to something. Now, a perfect experiment would look at how accelerated ventures, let me back up. A perfect experiment to answer this question would be to receive applications from, 1,000 entrepreneurs and then say, okay, 100 of them are going to be accelerated, the rest are not. And we choose this randomly and then to see how it comes out. But that's not realistic because accelerators are trying to select the most promising ventures, the ones that they think are going to be the best fit for their program, going to benefit the most from what they have to offer, etc. A key part of acceleration is the selection process. So what we do is something sort of in between, a randomized controlled trial and then just looking at your graduates. What we do is we look at all of the entrepreneurs that were selected into and then participated in an accelerator versus those that applied but were rejected. So you would, expect maybe in some cases for selection itself to be to make those entrepreneurs that succeed do better, but we're looking at that gap to see just how wide it is. And so that's how, when we talk about accelerator impact in this presentation, that's what I'm referring to. I'll pause there. I don't want to get too into methodology because there's a lot of ways you can get around this, but does that make sense so far? Cool.
Well, I guess I'll revisit the thing I mentioned briefly.
Yeah.
Comparing them to companies. So when we did it, it was companies we would have taken if we had the capacity. Right? Because if you're comparing the success to all applicants, particularly say if you're offering rather a lot of money. So Echoing Green gets a massive quantity of applications, A, because they're an awesome program, and B, because they offer a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if you compare the Echo and Green Fellows to all the applicants, it's going to look amazing because a lot of those people have shut up no business applying. Like, what is the level at which do you have any delineation?
So yes and no. No, in the sense that the reports that Galley puts out, we don't. We just look at the averages for accepted versus rejected. Interestingly, we have seen some cases, some programs where the rejected entrepreneurs on average are outperforming the accepted. So it hasn't been as clear cut as you might expect. But
well, you're going to see that with social enterprise because they're going to reject people who are only trying to make money, who might be more financially successful.
Yeah, depending on what the program's looking for, that's totally a possibility. But on the flip side of that, we really encourage academic research to be done with this data set. So whereas some data sets will go so deep, our goal was to gather like this limited amount of information, but go really, that gives us a big enough sample size that there's been some academic research done with this data set that has been able to get a little more specific in who they're including in their sample. So I'll actually touch on that in a moment. So I broke this down into 4 key takeaways. So I won't bore you with all the graphs and details. These were what I think is most interesting and pertinent for all of you. The first one is that after all these years of looking at accelerated ventures and non-accelerated and looking at their growth trajectories over time, we do see accelerated ventures are doing better on average year over year than non-accelerated. So again, that might not seem surprising to you, but I think this speaks to a couple things. First of all, like I said, selection is not easy. I think it's simple to come in from an outside perspective and say, oh, they're just selecting the best. But a lot of accelerator programs are like, yeah, but we put in so much time into recruitment. We put so much time into forming a selection panel, trying to decide if we care more about the founder or the business progress so far, et cetera. There's so much that goes into that, that alone is a great contributor to entrepreneurial ecosystems, is to say, these are the ones that we deemed good enough to be in this accelerator. Therefore, they're going to have more visibility with investors, et cetera. So we don't want to just discount selection. It is part of this. So I think it's important. But on another note, we did have an academic paper come out that did look at, they were able to parse out the selection effect from the actual programming effect. A little complicated the way they did it. Happy to share the article, but essentially what they found is that there is a programming effect above and beyond selection when they're looking at averages across programs. So, and the way they did it is very interesting. But point being, our takeaway and what we've shared with our audience, and particularly funders who are interested in accelerator programs, is there is something very positive happening with the acceleration experience around the world. However, that's not the case for all programs, and that's not all the case for all entrepreneurs. So that's on average across the board. But a couple things, one which is not mentioned on this slide, but we have looked before at the variance in programs, and there's huge variance. Some programs seem to have a great effect, some are having a minimal effect. You can't necessarily, we don't put out rankings or anything like that. That's not our purpose. But I think it does go to show, like, what are reasonable expectations for a particular accelerator in a particular ecosystem, and try to be like reasonable about what those might be. But also, even within a cohort, all entrepreneurs are not experiencing the same type of growth, right? When we say that participants on average outperform non-participants, it's not typically because all participants are performing well and all rejected entrepreneurs are performing poorly. Usually what it means is that among the participants, there's some that really make it and they're pulling up the average, right? So when we look like at this chart, we saw it's like most of the progress that's being made is just in those highest performing entrepreneurs. And I think in the more traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, like the earlier version of acceleration that was so popular in Silicon Valley, that's expected. Like, you expect a lot to fail, but then to find a few that might really take off. I think that that's changing a little bit and is not so prevalent in international development, where you're wanting to see a larger number of entrepreneurs grow more moderately. But it's important just to reiterate, especially for a lot of these takeaways are directed at funders, trying to make sure they understand, like, what's a reasonable expectation. So takeaway 3 is that there's no clear recipe for a successful acceleration program. We have tried with our data to look at what do they emphasize in their training? What is the gender breakdown of their mentors? What is the amount of time spent individually versus in the program, et cetera. We've tried to do it all with this large data set, and nothing really comes out as significant, which doesn't necessarily surprise me because there's only so much detail you can get collecting data the way we do. I think to get those nuances, you have to do a lot more qualitative look. But it is important, I think, to state, because we do get the question all the time, like, what's the perfect accelerator program? And essentially our takeaway is like, it depends where you are, who you're trying to serve, et cetera. So, but that being said, some broad takeaways did come out of our research, which came from some of the quantitative analysis, and then mostly we conducted interviews with the highest performing entrepreneurs in our data set to try to get some sense of that. So the positive factors is when accelerators can provide an environment that allows for peer learning. Interestingly, in some previous research we've done, the programs that prioritize peer learning over other aspects of their program tended to see the best results. And entrepreneurs often would say that they would go into a program thinking, you know, I'm here for the mentorship, the funding, et cetera. But when they left, oftentimes it was the peer learning that made one of the greatest impacts on them. Customized support, so not being so tied to specific training, that there is some room for tailored support targeting specific challenges that an entrepreneur is having. Localization of services and expectations. So again, we have worked with accelerators from Nepal to Boulder, Colorado. So, you know, they have very different approaches, and I think that's really important. Like, some negative feedback I received from entrepreneurs are those that, you know, apply to investment readiness programs that are located in countries or regions where investment isn't prevalent. So even though you're going through this investment readiness program, you're preparing yourself, there's even a pitch day at the end, but there's no serious entrepreneurs that come to the table. So maybe an investment readiness program isn't even the right program for that place unless they can make the right connections internationally. So just being realistic. And then last is strategic introductions. Oftentimes it's not the program itself, but just a program being willing to vouch for an entrepreneur to this one, you know, investor they know, and then they end up having this partnership. And a lot of those unstructured components of the program, for those entrepreneurs that really benefit, those just came up time and again as the value. Some negative factors, you know, lack of peer learning or lack of cohort cohesion. Like some entrepreneurs were sharing with us, if you know, I'm coming in and I'm in a different sector, I'm at like a way later stage than these other people, like I'm just not going to gain a lot from the experience. So making sure that there's enough similarity in one dimension or another. I get questions a lot about whether it's better to be sector specific or not. Nothing's really popped out with that for me, as long as entrepreneurs feel like they're able to learn from, and in a sense almost compete with, in a healthy way, their peers. Poor matching between entrepreneur needs and accelerator offerings. Again, that's like the investment readiness example I just gave. Like if they're coming in with, you know, saying they want to gain customers and expand to a new market, but the accelerator, all they want to talk about is investment readiness, like that might, you know, not be a good fit. And that happens a lot, even with the high performing entrepreneurs. We talked to a lot that said they went through one program, didn't really give them what they needed. They had to find this other one that finally gave them what they needed. So we advocate a lot for there being more efficient matching. And then, like I mentioned, overemphasis on investment or lack of connections to investors. That's come up countless times. I'm really interested to hear in the discussion portion, like how some of you have dealt with this. But making sure that if investment is the gap you're trying to fill, you actually have a way to fill it. So the fourth one, we're getting close to the end of my presentation, and we'll jump into discussion. Fourth key takeaway is that acceleration does not benefit all entrepreneurs equally. And none of this, I'm assuming none of this is surprise to you. I think the value of what I'm trying to present today is to say that after years and years of research, these are the conclusions that have come up time and again and are so steady that we think they're worth sharing with all stakeholders, and that there's evidence to back them up. So if any of you are saying like, yeah, I totally knew that, and I need to communicate it to a funder or a partner, like reach out to me and we can give you the data to back that up. So that's really where this is coming from today. But acceleration not benefiting all ventures equally. Our research has shown that ventures in developing economies have a harder time finding investment than in high income countries. Women-led ventures are raising less investment than men-led ventures, even when controlling for things like sector and experience. That has been, I think, our most read report is on women-led ventures, and it's actually led to some research with the World Bank and Village Capital to look more on the investor side, what might be contributing to that. So happy to share more there. And then also expatriate entrepreneurs they have greater access to funding than local entrepreneurs in a lot of developing economies, which I think is a multifaceted challenge with equity. So there's been an academic paper published about that using the Galley data, which I'm happy to share. So what's the message that we're sending out to Andy members who are, for those of you who missed the beginning, are investors, corporations, foundations, a lot of accelerators and incubators. So we're saying accelerators, adjust your programming based on the local ecosystem. Don't underestimate the unstructured components of your program. Consider how you might be contributing to biases. There are a lot of resources out there on how to do better here. And then clearly define your value add. I think there's a lot of confusion for entrepreneurs about what this accelerator offers versus that one, because there's a lot of jargony language being thrown around. But being really specific about what you're looking for and what you contribute is great. Entrepreneurs, we're also communicating to entrepreneurs just to be clear about what exactly do you expect to get out of an accelerator. Look at the graduates to make sure these potential peers are individuals you want to spend your time with, and consider attending multiple programs. And I know that might be a little bit controversial of a statement, because there is, some complaints about entrepreneurs program hopping. But what we found through some research is that it can be effective when it's actually, there is a clear roadmap and the programs that entrepreneurs are attending offer different things. So like an incubation program earlier on, and then maybe an accelerator that's sector specific as a next step, things like that. And then the message we've been sharing with donors, which has been a lot of our dissemination efforts with this research, has been that accelerators are effective in general, on average, not all of them, but on average, we're seeing that they're effective, but they need financial support. There's a lot of demand from funders to see accelerators be financially self-sustaining, but the message that we're sending is that that's really, really hard to do. And for what a lot of funders are looking for accelerators to accomplish, they probably should not be expecting them to be self-sustaining unless they have a model where they're giving a lot of attention to like consulting services and other things. Accelerators on their own cannot solve a lot of ecosystem constraints. So investment keeps coming up as one. You can't, just by putting an accelerator somewhere, you can't magically make investors appear. So it's important to remember that they're just one part of the puzzle. And don't assume that all entrepreneurs are going to succeed. I think a lot of funders have like certain targets for accelerator programs to reach, like, 70% of your entrepreneurs will grow by X amount. But I think it's a trade-off, either more entrepreneurs growing marginally or maybe some that are growing significantly, depending on the risk profile of the accelerator. And it's important to understand it's a trade-off. And then last, just like, as a funder, if you funded one program that worked a lot, it doesn't mean another program in another country needs to use that same model. Like it needs to be localized, and you can't have like one model that you push onto accelerator programs. So that's sort of the bulk of what these reports found. There's a lot more detail, a lot of data, a lot of figures if you're wanting to use this in any of your own work, but those are the messages that we're getting out. Would love to hear any questions that came up or any sort, yeah, if you have like any more details you'd like to hear, or if you think something seemed confusing or even wrong, happy to discuss. We have a little bit of time before moving into a discussion, like a guided discussion. And I can start with Sarah's question, what she sent over chat about like how Andy's using this data to catalyze change in the impact ecosystem to better support accelerator programs and entrepreneurs specifically. Yeah, so I think data is always in high demand, right? And when we produce research on this topic, it takes a little while for it to sort of trickle into the right audiences and spark enough interest that there becomes action. But I think a good example is the World Bank example I shared, where we started putting out some information on what the Galley data set contained regarding gender. And there were some clear just discrepancies in terms of access to investment. And that sparked some deeper research by World Bank economists in partnership with Village Capital to look at, what are the roots of this, and found that there is a lot that's unexplainable through observable factors. And there's some of it's explainable through observable factors, risk tolerance, et cetera, but some of it's not. And so it actually led to this investor project, two projects actually. One that's a research project Village Capital is conducting on trying different investor training programs to reduce bias. And then also a World Bank project that's awarding accelerators a certain amount if they can help women entrepreneurs gain investment. So yeah, we don't have like one specific way to catalyze change in the ecosystem. The hope is that we have a diverse enough audience within Andy membership and beyond that this data gets to the right people who can really make a difference. All right, someone else asked, do you have data on relative terms of accelerator deal? If so, does the analysis show any change in results? Comments about equity with our entrepreneurs worth it? Okay, does this, Jack, would you be willing to actually like explain? I'm not sure what you mean by relative terms of accelerator deal.
Sure. So sometimes accelerators will come in and say, I want 5%. And you're going to give me 5%. Other times they will have some obligations where they have to show up a certain number of times. Sometimes they say they have to pay a fee. Right. So entrepreneurs see a bunch of different deals. I know, for instance, someone would come and say, geez, it's really expensive for me to join to work with a generalized accelerator because they can't introduce me to the people who do the deals. And I'm just wondering if there's any feedback on that relative term and how that works.
Yeah, that's such a good question. One that I would love to do more research on because I don't have much that's specific. But yeah, I remember like several years ago reading some real critiques of accelerators that said they're actually just stealing from entrepreneurs because they would be taking like 15% equity and who knows, where this would go. And also you touched on charging. I find this so interesting that some accelerators, take an equity stake and provide seed funding, and then some just like charge for participation just as like a flat fee. To me, what this says is the acceleration model is just adapting like so widely depending on where you are and like what types of entrepreneurs you're serving. So what I'm seeing is that the programs that charge tend to be like a little bit earlier stage when you're looking more at the training side of like, it's an exchange of knowledge and initial connections for this fee versus like, we think that you're actually going to take off and we're going to put years of investment into this program. So in terms of how entrepreneurs see that, I think, I can't say for sure, but I think that there would be excitement if there are more programs willing to take equity and provide seed funding, because I think it just aligns the expectations of the accelerator program with the entrepreneur a little bit more cleanly than if it's just a fee and then we give you some services and then sometimes the entrepreneur can feel like left out. But Ian, yeah, please speak up.
So in the impact side of things, we actually stay away from doing investment because we feel it reduces the alignment. As soon as we invest, we are now looking at, because I'm involved in both investment and non-investment deals, but with my nonprofit, there's not investment.
Mm.
And because as soon as there's investment, I no longer have the incentive for the most impact.
Interesting.
That has been removed.
Yeah.
It's, it's hopefully still, we want impact, but as soon as somebody's money that wants to get paid back is in the game, we are no longer aligned for the greatest impact. We may not be completely disaligned because we're impact investors, but it feels off.
Do you encourage your entrepreneurs to find outside investment at all? And if so,
Oh yeah, I mean, well, I
find
think more people are seeking equity investment than should, but I'm not saying that equity investment, the fetishization of Shark Tank. This is a man who's about to be on stage with somebody from Shark Tank, because apparently, as I say, not as I do. But it's got value, but it doesn't have the value we play it up as, right? There's so many funds from your customers, I'm a huge fan of royalty investment. I'm a huge fan of investment where the payout is based on the accomplishment of the goals. But I'm also recognizing that the people who ask me to put their money into companies want it back, so they can maybe put it in other companies that are going to do good, for whatever reason they want it. And that's not, to me, as much of an alignment as just giving people the tools to help them succeed on their own in the way that they want to.
Right. So is the outcome of that accelerators mostly make their fees from DFIs and foundations and impact investors?
Ian, what's your take on that?
So we're a nonprofit, so we sort of cheat that question. I do charge companies, but I charge them a tiny amount because we found that if we were free, people didn't take us seriously. There are a few countries we do it are you OCED or OECD? I always get that backwards, or LDC or whatever. It's either $10, $50, or $250, depending on where you're from. I have personally paid more in wire fees to folks from the $10 countries than they paid in. But by charging a little bit, we get them to take it seriously. But we're a nonprofit, so we get third parties to pay for this to happen because we're very impact focused. I understand not everybody can do that. Yeah, it comes from the outside, but that's why you want funders, right? And funders is separate from investors.
Right. I also saw Katrina put in the chat something interesting. Katrina, do you want to speak up, or would you like me to read I'm happy to read your comment if you'd rather.
Sure, I can speak up quick. So yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting, and I haven't been too deeply involved in that program itself. I work on a different program, but it was just an interesting, and this is our first time running the program, but it was just an interesting thing that we saw where it was we had all these companies apply to the program and we offered them spots, and then ultimately they were like, oh no, I don't actually want to give up equity, and so we're kind of trying to figure out what to make of that, and if it's part of a bigger trend, all that. So curious if anyone else has seen something similar.
We do a lot of research on we do some in the US, but a lot more in developing economies, and at least in Latin America and some of the research we've done, there's a tendency to not be interested in equity investment. I say tendency, this is just among our sample and those that we interviewed, it's not across the board, right? But there's a lot more interest in maintaining, say, family ownership or not. And it also with women-led ventures, some of the research that we did and asking accelerators is they said that a lot of women were a little bit more reluctant to open up that ownership to others. So that's interesting that you're in Minneapolis, right? And that you said that, because I wonder if that's the same issue, if they're looking for more organic growth, or maybe they just have different offers that they're more interested in, because I haven't looked as much into the US where maybe investment is it's always a constraint, but maybe not as much. That's really interesting. Do they tell you why they're they're looking for a better deal, or they're just no longer interested in sharing the ownership of their company?
I'm not sure exactly, because again, I'm hearing this secondhand from the person who runs the program, but the sense that I got was that it was, I don't want to give up ownership of my company, like no matter how small it might be. So yeah, and I know, I think at least one of them ended up in a different program that didn't require equity. So it could be, yeah, I don't really know.
No, it's a good question. And if you're taking equity, oftentimes it's because you see there being some version of rapid growth, right? And oftentimes to achieve rapid growth, you need outside investment. So that's an interesting, I think that might be part of entrepreneurs just like trying to figure this thing out and make it the best for themselves, even though it's like not totally clear if you should always go the grassroots level or the other way. So I'm seeing more and more different interpretations of what accelerators are doing, and they're, you know, the acceleration model does, like, originally it had like an equity stake. So I think you're right. There's like some confusion there, but anyway, off the point, I wanted to have a quick discussion on a few points, mostly so I can hear from you, and just, this is an opportunity for me to learn as well, and hopefully for you to learn from each other. But there's, and I'll share the screen just briefly and then I'll take it back off. Thank you for whoever pointed out that I was minimizing everyone's faces for the sake of my slide. But for these, you can see my slide, right? Not the best with tech. Okay. But the first one, I'm just curious, like, does anybody want to share like lessons learned or the way that they've decided on the right mix of standardized training versus tailored support? Because this is something that comes up a lot with accelerators. Because part of the benefit of having a cohort is that you can support more entrepreneurs at one time with your content, but then sometimes it's too generalized and it's not very helpful. So would love to hear anybody share, you know, how they've gone about the learning process there.
Abby, if you want, I can also.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And also, like with the previous question and the comment, it's I also work with the Tesla Time Alliance. So this is a program designed by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. So it's together with Ashoka, Bridge for Billions, Lefil Consulting, PC4A, and I'm forgetting someone else, and New Ventures. So the idea was to how we build different programs that support market-based solutions at the base of the pyramid. So we basically designed like every part of the program, from the incubation to corporate ventures. So a specific, like a specific type of programs and a specific type of support for these types of solutions, because this is where we focus mostly. It's like we need to may have like inclusive programs for the base of the pyramid. So we're 100% focused on that. So basically we're trying to find the needle in the haystack, because it's so hard to find these solutions right now. And so we're struggling a lot. And many of the challenges that we face is exactly in the acceleration program that New Ventures designed. So it's specifically designed for those types of entrepreneurs. So it can be very standardized, but at some point they can request very specific coaches or mentors in specific topics. But the three things that we identified, and that is a very standardized content, is on system change strategies, gender mainstreaming. So, but actually with the focus of how can you improve your business if you change maybe only this indicator in terms of gender, for example, on HR or policies or communication, advertising. So we only demand one specific indicator in terms of gender. And the other is, of course, evaluating their impact, because this is like the weakest pillar in every social entrepreneur that we support. So We standardize only those contents, but then we have like very specific, like sector specific mentors. And this is not it's an equity-free acceleration program. And actually the incentive is that if you are selected, we only choose 10 entrepreneurs for each cohort. And the incentive is that, okay, we're going to give you all this work for free, but then you have to commit to report your impact for at least 3 years. We're being successful. Of course, there's entrepreneurs that after our acceleration program that they just disappear. So if you have like a magic formula for that, my ears are open. But it's just basically finding the right incentives. So like, why are you going to give this acceleration program for free, and where are you really adding value? So far we have been supporting like 120 something entrepreneurs so far since 2014. And yeah, I can say maybe there's like 5 or 6 entrepreneurs that are not reporting their impact, but we have been successful so far.
Yeah, and the impact measurement does, if for social entrepreneurs, it ends up being so important as they try to raise funds or, you know, get philanthropic support. There's so much that it's really important. So yeah, I have, and unfortunately I have no magic bullet for receiving survey responses, though some tried and true ways are always bugging people, which I'm sure you do. And then also sometimes we offer raffles like funding, like so that's always, money is always of interest to entrepreneurs. But thank you.
On survey responses.
Sorry?
Ask very few simple questions.
Yeah, that's also a good point.
And so if you're asking a lot of people, you might want 10 questions you want answered. But if you ask 2 questions and you break them up, you're going to get more responses. This is like what all the fast food joints do when they send out the giant surveys. It's like 3 questions at most, less than 30 seconds to answer the survey.
Yeah, it's so true. That
but that is how you measure the impact of your program, right? So 2 questions maybe are not enough.
But you ask different questions of different companies, right? So, and then over time, you end up getting all the questions for all the people. It doesn't work for every question like that, I understand, but that has been the thing I found that's gotten the most responses, is keeping the survey super short and then essentially asking the survey over the course of a year. Every couple of months, I get another couple of questions. Which doesn't work for every set of questions, I understand.
Yes, that could be its own session. It probably should. That'll be the next session I propose at a conference. We'll be sharing everyone's experience with getting survey responses, because that is always the greatest challenge. Well, just to thank you for that, and just to move us along, to see if any other interesting ideas pop up. The bias question. Curious if anyone has found. So Danny, you just shared, you know, that you do like a gender training. If anybody wants to share like specifics, like do you pull a curriculum from a certain source? I know like Frontier Incubators, you know, put out like a gender lens incubation and acceleration toolkit. Is there any, but beyond gender, is there any other resource that you found to be very helpful? Or is there a reason that you haven't, in like a particular challenge you're struggling to overcome? Because this is something we want to look at soon.
Well, I'm just sharing a link, because this is basically, we have been giving this gender workshops in 2014. So now we managed to transform it into an online course. So it's now available for free and open. So everybody can access at any time, at any moment. So this is pretty much what we, is all the know-how, put it into an online workshop. So you are free to share, to go through it, and please feedback on it. But it's basically how can we provide very specific insights on how you can incorporate these gender lenses, because then it can become very political, or can be, you know, be very, how do you say, polemical, like very polemic. Is that the word? Very polemic. So we really try to focus, okay, what is your core business? And in your core business, what are your biases? And then we just foster how they can evaluate and prove those assumptions and really come up with very specific initiatives to address that. So it's not about changing like the focus of the enterprise, but really focusing on very, very specific things that can at least improve some size of the business. So the workshop is very focused on that.
Ian, were you going to speak up earlier?
I was, but I was just going to make the point that I've been talking a lot, so I was waiting for somebody else to talk. But so does anybody else have anything they want to throw in? Okay, then I will talk. So one of the things we look at, because we have a written component to our program in which we evaluate the companies, is we look at 8,000 reviews, blah, blah, blah. Other people do it differently, but we look at our reviewers and we track, are they over or underestimating the success of the companies they review compared to the other people who review the same companies at the same time.
Interesting.
We call this our Santa score because we have to remove overall optimism and overall pet. You love everything. It doesn't matter if you thought something was going to be a success. And so we remove that. And then we have what we call the bias score. How much more likely are you to support in general? And then we compare backgrounds and blah, blah, blah. And we have found that amongst our 1,200 reviewers, there's a slight bias by Americans against people of color in the US, but not elsewhere, which we are working to adapt. So it's not a global thing. And I don't know, there's a whole, again, I don't want to go into detail.
That's really interesting. Have you released anything about that?
Well, we about every 6 months, I do a talk on it. In fact, Sarah, I think I'm doing one in late September with ATA, right? Yes, there'll be a date. I'm sure she'll put it out on that. But yeah, so we put that out. I just did an impact entrepreneur with Lori Lane Zucker, and I do about whatever. But the point is tracking something for you all, tracking how you look at companies and what you thought they were going to be successful at if you're doing any kind of measuring, and then seeing who was good at spotting companies that will do well and do poorly, so that you can bring those mentors or reviewers or advisors in. So some things that I can tell you that won't surprise you, but again, like what Abby said, we've got data. We looked at 773 companies over a 10-year window. One random thing, mixed gender teams outperform all female and all male significantly.
We always find that too. I'll back you up on that.
Like and not surprising, all female teams do slightly better on revenue and longevity, and all male teams do slightly better at raising funds and hires. But I think that's more about the people they're raising funds from than the guessing. Could be wrong, just guessing. Experience is better at spotting at pessimism. So folks who've been doing this for a long time are not necessarily better at spotting companies that will do well unless it's in their exact industry. They are better at spotting companies that will do poorly because failure is pattern recognition, is to move the, what's it, the Tolstoy quote or somebody? I don't know. All happy companies are happy in their own way, but they're unhappy in the same way. I'm mangling that quote, and obviously it's, but that is a thing. People who are trained, the more experience you have, the better you are at risk assessment, not necessarily the better you are at spotting companies that will do well, unless you know that particular region, industry, whatever, very, very well. And there's all sorts of other stuff, but it's to play for the rest of the folks on this call. Who's looking at companies for you, and are you tracking how well they are doing at spotting the companies that will eventually do well or poorly? And are you retaining the people who are good at that? And are you noting any of the biases? The rest of this talk is an hour long, and I'm not going to take up Abby's question.
No, I'm so glad that got plugged, because I haven't really heard of anybody actually measuring that meticulously, like the actual.
Sure, I'll put the link in for our basics. On
I think Sarah did.
Yeah. Also, can you make it so we can save the chat? Because right now we can't.
How does that?
Make Sarah co-host. She knows how to do it.
Okay. I was like, that's not gonna happen because I don't know. Right.
You
Made co-host.
and I put our, yeah, there we go.
Yes,
And
but
we're
good
gonna
call,
be,
because-
we'll be sharing all of the sources. I've been also copy pasting all the resources shared in the chat, so we'll put it on the landing page. It might not make it onto the landing page till like the end of this week, but it will be there along with the recording of this video. So we'll have all the resources.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. That was actually very helpful. And I'll just make a note that like in the gender research we've done, programs that like say they put an emphasis on making sure that there's teams with women founders didn't seem to have like any better track record, but the programs that had a more equal gender balance in terms of like selectors and mentors did. So it's kind of like put your money where your mouth is type thing. So I'd be curious to see when it comes time for your talk, the demographics too. But just
we very specifically do not label it that, but 50% of our invitations must go to companies led or co-led by women. And we try and get 50% of our mentors. We're 40 something working on it.
yeah, that was basically there's no magic number, but like when we looked at averages, it was like above like 45% or something, ended up being like way more equitable in the end. But we have just a few minutes and I'm just curious, like, so Galley's been this, years long study where we're looking at doing some additional research in the future, probably not expanding that data set, but doing new things with the data set we have and like conducting new studies using the data and like with interviews and things like that. And I just want to hear from all of you who are doing the work, like, is there research that you've been searching for that would really help you improve your program that you haven't seen come out yet from any organization? Something that we could do that would be helpful to you. Or something you just wish you knew as you're running your program. I mean, I think one has popped up and that's about the interest in equity. Like what drives that interest and is it actually a good deal for the entrepreneurs? I'm going to take note of that. Anything else pop up in your mind? Ian, you have the floor.
All right, anyone else? Says the men who talked all the time. Okay. Trends in what kinds of companies we're seeing.
Okay.
In my experience, that you see this wave of companies and then 4 years later, you see companies that have sort of solved the problem.
Okay.
So like I saw massive solar lights from like 1998 to 2005. Everybody had a solar light thing.
Okay.
So late 90s, it was the thing. And then and then there wasn't one. And then it became, somehow they figured it out. And then it became about distributing them. Like these patterns, like we're going to do the thing, and then we're going to distribute the thing. And then we're going to, oh God, we forgot to actually make sure the thing doesn't cause harm. And so we're going to do that, right? We're not going to put the distributor of the food out of business because we have the solar light. And that was also the person about the kerosene, whatever. There's all sorts of examples I'm sure many of us are familiar with. But they come in these patterns. And if I knew that we had seen the 4 years of water carry, let's get rid of head carry, right? And then we'd seen the couple of years later, oh, right, and let's make sure that people don't resent the women now that they have free time and education. We have to make sure that there's not the blowback. You got those companies, right?
Yeah.
And those patterns are pretty visible. And I don't know all of them, but I just know, there's a bunch of industries. So if I could sort of see something coming, I could prepare for it.
Yeah.
If I knew that 3 years ago, there were a ton of, I don't know, carbon sink or something, I don't know. I would know, I would give it 3 to 4 years, and then I would stock up on mentors and resources on the assumption that a whole bunch of people tried a thing. And then after a couple of years, I'm going to start to see a whole bunch of people, okay, we figured out the technology, but that's not really the hard part, is it? It's getting people to actually use it in a way that doesn't piss off, blah, 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 blah. And so knowing what's coming, because it happens in these patterns, will be very valuable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you're right, like the innovation isn't always in the technical solution. A lot of times it's in the dissemination.
But we see those first. I mean, please.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Here, please tell me if I'm missing something. But like, am I the only person who sees like the gadget first, then how to get it to people, then how to do it in a way that doesn't actually make things worse? Like in those patterns, not every time, blah, 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 but like, I would love to know what's coming next.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. That's
data set.
That's really interesting. And it doesn't really fit with the data we've already collected from Galley, but it does maybe fit with like our sort of directory of accelerators, trying to like get a picture of what's going on. We also do like ecosystem snapshots where we capture like all the organizations supporting entrepreneurs, and we can try to pull out some trends like that. I think it's a really good idea. Thank you for that. So we're at time, but I just put a few resources up here. It sounds like Sarah will be sending them too. We have a lot on our website. I just encourage you to check it out. It's galleydata.org. It has a benchmarking tool if you want support measuring your impact. It has all of our 30+ reports. You can play around with that data set of 23,000 ventures even without downloading it. We have some filterable graphs. So please feel free to check that out. And I also put my email in the chat, and I would be happy to talk to any of you further. So thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Abby. It was very interesting.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for this, the tech support, Sarah. I'm going to close this down. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.